Our presenter today is Rachel Ludwig, Vice President Talent Development for the Future of Work at the Florida Chamber Foundation. In this role, Rachel leads the Florida Chamber Foundation's initiatives to improve Florida's talent pipeline to become the nation's #1 workforce state by 2030. The Future of Work Florida initiative focuses on cultivating partnerships among the businesses, community, workforce, and education partners to develop talent pipeline strategies for early learning through lifelong learning. Before transitioning to the Florida Chamber, Rachel was the statewide director of professional development at the Florida Department of Education Division of Career and Adult Education. At FDOE, Rachel collaborated with educational leaders and key stakeholders to increase her knowledge of various industry and workforce needs throughout Florida. She led expansion efforts of integrated education and training programs, which accelerate the ability of adult learners to enter the workforce. Rachel has worked in K-12, post-secondary, and workforce education to serve learners across urban, suburban, and rural spaces. She spent much of her career teaching adult GED and English language learners. The handout of the presentation can be downloaded from the chat section, which can be accessed by clicking the chat icon, speech bubble, at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can also post your questions in the chat section. If you're having difficulty hearing the presentation, phone numbers that can be used to call and join the webinar via phone while following the slides online will be posted in the chat window too. At this time, we will begin our webinar. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate you all, and welcome to this month's webinar. I'm really excited to present today. As mentioned, I lead our talent and education efforts here at the Florida Chamber Foundation, and really excited to have this conversation today, as learners with unique abilities are a very important part of our talent pipeline here in Florida. So I'm going to start off by actually sharing a little bit of economic data with you and really set the stage for why this conversation is so important. Our 2030 blueprint, if you haven't seen a version of this slide before, was created several years ago, and really, guides all of our work here at the Florida Chamber. It's kind of our North Star. We have 6 pillars, and improving Florida's talent pipeline is my favorite pillar, and I think the most important pillar. But these 6 pillars really guide our work. There's 39 goals underneath them. And when this was created, it was stated that if we got these things right, we have the potential to become the 10th largest global economy by 2030. And so right now, today, we would be the 16th largest global economy. And we've kind of teetered between 15 and 16 off and on. I've been on the team for just under 2 years, and now today we're at 16. And that's a really massive player globally. But one thing that's really important to think about is, as we continue to grow as a state, is, the thought that we have to create 1.45 million net new jobs by 2030, and who are going to be ready, prepared, and skilled, to take those positions to continue to thrive. Some of the metrics that you'll see on the bottom as well are, sometimes people are like, oh no, how do we make this stop? The growth that's happening in Florida when we think about, that many more drivers and people moving to the state. But really, I think, as Mark Wilson would share, our CEO, we need to plan better than some of the other states that have seen a large growth. And I think that our policymakers and state leadership is already really thoughtful about that. So I'm going to share a little bit more information with you and then tie it all back to talent pipeline and your work today. So thank you again for being with us. To kind of set the stage, when I talk about being the 16th largest global economy, we're looking at a GDP, or like the outputs of the economy, at 1.72 trillion. And we've seen this report was, I'm sorry, the 2030 blueprint was released in, about 2018. So it's several years ago, but we've seen such a dramatic increase in that GDP number since the release of that. And we continue to see Florida, be a place where people want to live, work, play, and raise a family. And that's really what we want for all Floridians and the businesses who decide to move here and stay here, and so that we can all enjoy this wonderful state. You can see the industries that sort of are leading the way in terms of the share of GDP. Financial activities is kind of out there in the front by a little while. But then we also have, education, healthcare, and then professional business services. Really interested to see over the next several years if those change at all, or if they continue similarly with, AI and technology and just the evolution of the workforce at such a rapid rate. So that is going to be interesting. We have a team of economists here at the chamber, and I think that they were really excited when we passed 10 million jobs. And so that was a really big deal. We continue to add jobs, as you can see, sort of year over year, as well as month over month. And that's a really healthy sign that Florida is continuing to grow as a state. And then obviously for the folks in the labor market, the labor force, that's positive because we have opportunities. And that's something that we're always keeping an eye on, are those sort of changes when the data is released. To kind of give you an update of sort of what the industries look like in terms of the growth year over year. Construction, as you can imagine, because of the growth that we're seeing, continues to lead in terms of increased job changes. And hospitality, we're of course a hospitality state, so that makes sense. And then education and health services, they're actually lumped together. And so, you get more people, you need more education in some cases, if younger ones are coming through. And then obviously the healthcare services are really important. This slide is super interesting to me. We expect all of our counties, all 67 counties in Florida, to increase in population. And so one thing that's really interesting is you'll see the projections for the next 2.8 million people, and it's really targeted in the major metro areas. So you're talking about South Florida, the Orlando area, Miami-Dade, obviously, Tampa area, Jacksonville, but also some of the surrounding counties will continue to see that large growth. But I think it's really interesting, that our team projects that every single county will grow. And so we actually released this week our report regarding the rural renaissance that I'm following really closely to kind of see. I know that there's a lot of emphasis on that in this legislative session, particularly because there's a lot of opportunity in our rural counties, along with the ones that are in the urban areas that are projected to continue to see that growth. So I want to provide for you, before we get into the conversation today, a snapshot of Florida's workforce opportunities. So we have a lot of things going right, and then there's some things that we really have to think about and probably be concerned about in some cases related to our workforce. And as I stated earlier, the number of jobs we need to create by 2030 is 1.45 million net new jobs. But then we also have a retirement, a lot of retirements looming sort of in the next 3 years. So that's 900,000 retirements expected. So, if you're, in early to mid-career, that means a lot of opportunity for you to elevate and climb the ladder quicker if that's what you're looking to do, because there's so many folks that are sort of aging out of the workforce. But then if you're an organization, who and a job creator, you also have to be thinking about what are we going to do when all of that experience leaves the workforce? How are we going to replace the knowledge and the people that are expected to retire? And planning and succession planning, leadership pipeline programs, those kinds of things are what a lot of companies are really looking to do if they're not already doing it, because these numbers are very high. So, and even the folks that are moving into Florida, Florida's a retirement state and we know that. But, looking at the number of folks who are going to leave the workforce in 3 years comes quick, right? So a couple of the other things that I would point out, if I move kind of down here, I'll talk a little bit more about this. This definitely relates to the work that you're doing with students and, whether they be is coming up through post-secondary, or even if you are working in your community and you in some way are mentoring folks that are looking for a career change or upskilling and reskilling. So what we've done is we have created what we're calling our top 30 high demand careers. And we actually have the data out to 2032. We've arranged these by workforce region. All of these careers are median salary or above, and they have high growth or high replacement projections. It means that maybe the replacement piece is people expected to leave the workforce, and then the growth piece is just as it sounds. They're growing career opportunities. Those are projected to make up about 20% of the overall job growth by 2032. So that 30 is a pretty significant number. It's not the end all be all. Obviously, there's so many more careers that, are not listed on that report, but it's pretty simple, and it lists out the education requirements, what the job titles are. And I think that it's a good conversation starter, honestly, because there's so many people who really don't know what they want to do. And then I think it comes with a caveat that we are seeing people move around so much that careers, I think sometimes when students think about what they want to be when they grow up, I don't even know what I want to be when I grow up. Like, people move around in careers, right? And you don't know what opportunities are going to present. And so I think thinking through like what makes sense as an entry point and what skills am I going to gain and what experiences am I going to gain that I can transfer later, or sort of build my library of skills and experiences that will later lead me into a career that, I'm really excited about. It doesn't have to be a forever thing. I think everybody should choose a career that they enjoy, because I think that you're better at work when you do. But at the same time, if something doesn't sound maybe appealing for your entire lifetime of work, it's probably likely you're not going to be in that role anyway. So I think when you see the list and you're like, talking through it and thinking through it with your family or your students or what have you, I think it's really interesting to think about what careers are there, but also the leadership opportunities that exist that someone can move into after some years of experience. Um, if you look on the left, or my left anyways, you'll see this opportunity population area. And I think this is something I talk a lot about because we have, the retirements that are happening, and we have a workforce and we have projected growth, and we need to create all these jobs. We really need to think through opportunity populations. And I just named a few because they're really high numbers. The folks that do not have a high school equivalency diploma yet, 1.8 million folks in Florida, as well as disconnected youth, which is sort of our younger population, 16 to 24, that are not enrolled in school and not employed. So there's some overlap with those populations likely, and some of them also might have, unique abilities and things like that. Maybe some other veterans are involved in that. There's a lot of different overlaps with different talent pools. And so I think it's really interesting to think about, how are we thinking differently? And I talk to employers about this. How are we thinking differently about how we recruit and retain and elevate folks that, are a part of a different demographic per se, or maybe, just need mentorship, right? And I think a lot of times and I taught GED learners for a long time, and I think a lot of times confidence is one thing and coaching is another thing. And I think that combination with the skills can really provide opportunities for folks that people didn't ever expect could come their way. So the last piece that we talk a lot about when we're sort of providing that snapshot of Florida's workforce opportunities is the child care challenge that we face. So about 150,000 folks have left the workforce due to child care issues. That's a lot of folks that want to be in the workforce, that were in the workforce, but there's a clock, you know, in terms of starting a family and having children. And so thinking through what we can do, I know the policy team here at the foundation or the chamber, the Florida Chamber, is really leveraging the data coming out of the foundation side to advocate for different policy changes that will help solve this challenge with childcare. And it is all interrelated. One thing I think is something that we've been talking about recently as well is our talent migration. So looking at the folks who come into Florida and who leave Florida and understanding if there are trends associated with that. So what we've noticed, and our economists have been tracking this for several months now, is that we are seeing the ages 20 to 29 leaving at a pretty high rate. And you can kind of see where the growth is sort of decreased, and that's okay. According to our economists, it's okay that the growth is starting to stabilize a little bit, because it does cause some challenges if you have such heavy growth in a really short period of time, in terms of maybe you can't plan as much for infrastructure and all those things. But one thing that we're seeing is the reasons for leaving are of concern. So the housing costs, as we will talk about in a minute, is something that people are really struggling with. The high cost of housing, rent, and also single family homes, condos, etc. And then the perceived job opportunities. So we have job opportunities here in Florida, but there's a perception maybe of this emerging talent that there are better opportunities elsewhere. And so that talent drain is something that I think we really need to, talk about as a state, because, as somebody who taught in the classroom for 10 years, you're thinking like how much time and energy and effort and resources by the state has gone into, training and, teaching our students, only for them to leave to go somewhere else. We really want to keep that talent pool here. I moved too fast. One other thing that I wanted to share before kind of pivoting to the education piece is looking at this balance of folks looking for work and those open positions, and also sharing with you that you can find this about your community on the floridascorecard.org. So right now it looks quite balanced. There's about 98 people looking for work for every 100 jobs open. You'll see the open jobs numbers actually decline from the last data release. That is what red means on the scorecard tiles. It means trending in the wrong direction. And then there are more unemployed folks. So that's, again, trending in the wrong direction. The rate actually stayed the same, but the number of people changed slightly. And then you can see there's quite a variance between counties, among counties, of what that looks like. And some of it has to do with commuter patterns, some of it has to do with job opportunities and population of the counties. But one thing that's interesting is, you have this balance or perceived balance of 98 to 100, but that doesn't mean that they're all 98 are skilled and prepared for those 100 positions. So it's a little deceptive, although we have seen this number balance out quite a bit in the last 2 years that I've been on the team. It's been low as 62 as a state. So it's come back quite a bit. But again, that doesn't always account for the skills gap. So enter future of work, right? So the future of work initiative is really aiming to unite the business community, workforce, and education partners. As you can see, I worked with a faculty member at FSU to sort of represent the sort of different talent pools in a honeycomb that was able to think through like what are some components of the future of work. And so I mentioned earlier the adult learner population. So that includes also like upskilling and reskilling. You have sort of workforce reentry. That could be people who, maybe took a career break or left the workforce for whatever reason. They want to enter back into the workforce. That could also mean something like second chance hiring, or even veterans who are transitioning. And so the transitioning and workforce reentry are kind of two buckets that I think about a lot. It just depends on the person's situation. Then we have sort of our early learning, K through 12 and post-secondary, sort of traditional talent pipelines. And then learners with unique abilities and thinking through and it was intentional to include that in this honeycomb, because when I'm talking to businesses and sharing about this work, it looks different when you're trying to, interview and recruit for different talent pools and some of the needs and some of the asks, honestly, for making sure that the workforce is being met where they are at. And so, and also given the opportunities to elevate and to shine in different ways. And then industry certifications is just one thing that I wanted to point out separately, because there's so many short-term sort of upskilling opportunities, as well as dual enrollment and things like that that are presented and really being emphasized. So that's why that honeycomb is kind of developed, and I speak to it a lot when I talk with businesses and thinking through, like, so what are your strategies for each of these different groups, because they do require a little bit different thinking. And then also pivoting to all the logos. So this is a partnership. I work regularly with sort of the different state agencies and some of the other partners, even that are not represented on this, on these logos. But it really takes a village, as you know, to do this work. And so I'm really grateful to be in this seat and sort of leverage my knowledge of working in schools and, my entire career in education. I did work in post-secondary, as well as university and student affairs, but largely was working with, learners that struggled and in some way, shape, or form, whether that be in, Indianapolis public schools. When I first started teaching, it was the lowest performing K through 12 school in the district. And, learners who just the school, traditional school did not work for them, and so they did not complete, and therefore coming back through their GED and English language learners. So I always have to give kudos to our advisory board for Future of Work, because they really are a wonderful group of leaders. They support this work, and I go to them often to pick their brains about different things that we're facing, or even legislation and things like that. Like, how would that impact you? What do you think that your peers, how would they react? So I'm really grateful for this group. One new ad that I'm really excited about is here on the top left is Ralph Aiello from Zello, and he is leading up the work-based learning efforts in Florida. And I think that this is really important for this conversation today, because I think work-based learning is one of those things. There's so many opportunities for students to learn, but they need to be immersed, and they need to really get access not only to the work environment, but also to the network. And, I'm a first generation college graduate, as was mentioned earlier for you, Ron. I went to Wisconsin. I'm really proud of that. But I, as a first generation student, I did not have a network really when I first started, and somehow landed driving the Oscar Mayer Mobile as my first job. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, honestly, after graduation. But I think that, with Zello and an intentional investment in increasing work-based learning in Florida, we really need to try to get students to plug into those opportunities, not only to sort of get that hands-on experience that's related to their education, but also to build that network and watch mentors and models of what the workplace looks like, right? So I'm happy that Ralph and Zello just joined our board for to elevate that space. One thing that we do a lot at the chamber, and happy to even have a conversation with you offline, aside from this webinar, is we're working to build awareness about the different tools, about the information I'm sharing today. A lot of people have never heard of some of this stuff, and many times those folks have some kind of role in shaping someone's career trajectory, whether that be as a mentor, as a parent, as a an educator. So we really want to work to continue to amplify that message of what are the high demand careers, what are the opportunities that are out there, and also with the research briefs and things like that, help sort of key leaders and decision makers understand some of the challenges and opportunities that exist. We have a Learners to Earners event. I'll share a little bit more about that in a second, but we would love for you all to join us. I think this year is going to be very special. We are doing some things a little bit differently than in the past. So I'm excited to talk about that in a minute. And then we also do a webinar series. It's Workforce Wednesday webinars. The next one will be in April, talking about leveraging AI to fuel talent development in Florida. And then we also do a podcast series. We're working really hard to sort of like use the different avenues to message everything to do with future of work, which is a lot of things. So um, learners to earners, I'm really excited. So this event really covers everything from, early learning through adult and post-secondary lifelong learning, really. But this event really brings together, business leaders, community-based organizations, educators across early learning, K through 12, post-secondary, adult and workforce. Some of the state agencies also attend, policymakers, philanthropy. I think we get a great turnout at this event. If you haven't been there before, I would recommend going. I think there's probably 300 to 350 people that were there last year, and we're outpacing what we were last year already. So I'm excited. I hope it sells out. But what we're doing this year that's different is we are creating a digital data walk for networking. And what that is going to look like is curating, our team is curating county by county digital data posters to really showcase the talent pipeline and the interesting metrics that are present in those counties. And then we're going to be having the intentional networking, within the workforce regions, the 21 career source, workforce regions, so that we can sort of serve as a convener and also really put the data in front of people so that they can really talk about that data. And a lot of it is probably already talked about, but we'll have the most updated data in these digital data passports, as well as you'll be able to really easily take that with you and continue your conversations after the fact. So I'm excited about that. There's more networking and intentional sort of conversations happening at the regional level this time. And I'm excited. I think it's going to be a good turnout. So when I talk a little bit about the talent pipeline pillar, that is my favorite and the most important pillar of our blueprint, we are actually talking about 6 different goals, and they are lofty goals intentionally that were created before my time here at the chamber. But looking at everything from kindergarten readiness all the way through employability skills. And employability skills is something that, obviously is transferable across industries, but also looking at that post-secondary attainment. So that is so important. I think we need to up the bar even from 60%. I saw a report released today talking about 72 to 75% of these jobs are going to, require post-secondary certificate or degree. And I think, that'll only increase. So thinking through what our metrics are today, but ultimately, the jobs and the careers that folks get are the determining factor of sort of, someone's economic mobility. And I think that's really important. So I think that, whatever we can do to message to students about the importance of building those skills, but also getting that experience so they understand what they like, what they don't like, what they could see themselves doing for work is really important. I want to show you now some of the scores that, you can kind of see here. This is a little bit busy of a slide. Our research economists worked with me to create this. So you can kind of see some differences of outcomes from pretty early on of students who, have an IEP or have a documented disability. And that is obviously something that is concerning when thinking through, we want the students to all have that equal opportunity of earned success. And so I'm just going to show you a couple different metrics. You can see sort of 3rd grade English language arts and then 3rd grade math. You can also see the 8th grade ELA and the 8th grade math. And those are pretty young. Honestly, those students are still, especially the 3rd grade ones, they haven't been in school that long. There's pretty significant gaps there. I will say that, from a parent perspective, and my son does have a documented disability as well, it's really challenging, as somebody who went through school and was pretty successful in school to watch sort of what the expectations are for students at such a young age. So I have hopes that, you know, when we really support our students and sort of channel their interests and strengths in a certain way, that we can move them, you know, in a positive direction and really get them career ready. I think sometimes it's daunting to look at the scores themselves, but that's just such a small part of the story. And I think that mentorship and good teachers is such an important piece of this conversation. So I'm going to move on to the next one. You can see here, like the high school graduation rates in Florida are really, really high. That's probably the metric that we're closest to meeting right now. But even then, there are some gaps that you can kind of see, you know, in terms of enrolling in post-secondary education. So what can we do? And I'm hoping that I was talking with Iris earlier that there is some positive movement there to support students in moving into post-secondary education. I also know that from my own experience teaching in the classroom, it's frustrating because sometimes when the students are, you know, starting off behind grade level, they're rewarded with another reading block and something that they don't like. And so that is really, really hard, you know, to pull students back in when that sort of negative attitude about school happens. And, you know, I lived that for a long time with the students that I worked with. But I just think it's so important that we continue to support the teachers that are working with students and really champion sort of this mindset of the eye on the prize is to help get students ready for a career. Because at the end of the day, no one ever asks about, you know, your score on a third grade reading assessment after you're already in that post-secondary education or career pathway. I don't want to discount the scores because obviously we have a measure. But I think that, you know, the focus, if I could wave my wand, would be more toward how are we preparing them for a career and the skills needed. Because I think ultimately that's the most important thing for the student. That's going to help them be successful in the long run. And here you can see some specific data related to autism. I think that was what our conversation actually earlier before this started was discussing. So you can see how CTE has actually been a pretty good fit for students that have autism. And I have my sort of assumptions about why that might be, but CTE is, if you're not super familiar with the acronym, it's Career and Technical Education. I worked in this world for a while, but really it tends to be like the more specific career-oriented courses that are outside of your traditional math, reading, science, and social studies. So anything that is sort of outside of that core curriculum sort of can be labeled as CTE. And a lot of times students, those are like the fun classes. Like students see those as the fun classes, whether that be business or healthcare or robotics or, you know, what have you. And so a lot of times, you know, in my experience working with students in the past, you know, it's amazing to watch sort of how much stronger and better, you know, they perform when they actually like the content. And so, you know, that's obviously not a shock, but it really is interesting. And so I'm not surprised to see some of these metrics where you can see students tend to even outpace the general population. The one thing though I would say that is concerning is the bottom number where it talks about salaries, right? And so again, how do we coach students to understand what the salaries are for a certain position and how to go through that process of negotiating and things like that? I know that's something that's really difficult. It's something that it takes a long time to master that and be brave enough to even try to negotiate, but there's a gap with the salaries, as you can see there at the bottom. All right, so moving on to the next section. So this is sort of like a workforce participation slide. So it talks about labor force participation. It talks a little bit about unemployment. You can see students that are, you know, have a disability, have higher unemployment rates than the general population. And then you can see sort of the labor force participation rate is quite different. And so I think that, again, when I'm talking about this with employers, I think it's about setting people up for success, right? And thinking through the needs and thinking through the work environment. And it maybe looks different in terms of how people like to work. And um, also the different roles that people are interested in might, I think sometimes blanket policies don't always, it's cookie cutter policies are really challenging, especially if you have folks with different needs. And I think the most important thing that I think we've gotten better at doing is helping learners advocate for themselves and ask employers and education, teachers and things like that for what they need. So you can kind of see here wage gaps in the workforce. And this is kind of small, maybe for you to read, but you can kind of see here, even by industry, what those differences look like. So blue would be, a person with a disability, and this is from the Able Trust data. And then red is without. And so you can kind of see what the differences in wages are. I want to look to see if I can answer the chat here. I don't know. I missed a bunch of things. I think probably what we're gonna have to do just for time's sake is I will get with Iris after the webinar, and like if there's stuff in the chat that we don't address, maybe we could reach out individually just so that I'm not like interrupting the presentation too much. But feel free to still like, put your information in the chat if you have questions, and we can address those either at the end or later. Okay, so this part right here, I really want to make sure that everybody gets this information, because I think this is the difference maker. A lot of our work and even some of the funding really is focused on the workforce needs of today or this upcoming year, for example. And like I said before, our top 30 high demand careers have identified what those projections look like out to 2032. And so I want to share with you what those look like at the state level, but I also want to show you what the charts look like, because I think this is a conversation that could really be game changing for those who are not that familiar with like different careers and career pathways and sort of the opportunities that exist. So if I show you put this down here. If I show you the top 10, no surprise that, you have some things like registered nurses that show up on nearly every single workforce region. This is a statewide list, by the way. You have truck drivers. It's a really good career opportunity. It's not easy work at all, but it would provide somebody with foundational skills to be a leader in transportation, logistics, distribution type careers down the road. And so I think, thinking through the skills and things learned from that career and doing that for a while, it's a very easy entry point as well, because it's short term. That might be an interesting thing to look at, the opportunities in your area. Then you'll notice there are a couple of what is called first line supervisors. So these are leadership roles. So thinking through, okay, if I enter in this kind of career pathway, there's also leadership positions that are projected to exist down the road. We see business, a lot of jobs in business. So, accountants, data analytics. I'll show you the next set here in a minute. Marketing, HR, those kinds of roles. There's also sales and a variety of sales roles. So you'll see in some of the regions, insurance, real estate, retail, those sorts of things. And then also skilled trades, right? Skilled trades, auto mechanics, and also leadership positions in those fields. You'll also see education show up in a lot of regions. So working on our teacher talent pipeline is really, really important. I always say it was the hardest job I've ever had, but also the most rewarding job I've ever had is working directly with students. And I actually, looking back, taught every single grade or worked with students in every single grade but sixth grade, because I taught English language learners for a long time, and you often push in the classroom or pull out students for small group activities. But that was a lot of fun and really hard work. But again, that is something we have to have good teachers in our classroom to continue to have a strong education system. And this is the last set. Again, a mix of, different kinds of industries represented here. Our law enforcement professionals, really interesting to see that need, as well as leadership positions. All right. And then the median wages, like I mentioned earlier, so those are all, we filtered out anything that was not a median salary or higher. So at that time, it was 45,000 and a little bit more. And then there's a key for the education requirements for these different careers. We're going to redo this as soon as there's more data out, and we're already playing with figuring out a way to maybe up the salaries because we know salaries will likely increase. So maybe even looking at what that could look like in the next iteration. This is the third iteration since I've been on the team. We like to keep our data nice and current. So I even sent an updated slide deck about an hour before this, just because I found data that was outdated. So want to share some examples of promising practices. I know that the work of connecting learners with unique abilities is a work that is obviously extremely important, is also very difficult at times, but requires partnerships in a lot of cases. So as you can see, I pulled a handful. We at the Chamber, Able Trust is a partner that is on our board of trustees for the foundation. I've connected with a few of the ARC programs throughout the state, and obviously this group is doing amazing work. There's some work at different companies such as Florida Blue and CDW and a few others, Pitney Bowes, that have done really great work and have been recognized for that work. So definitely my recommendation is, reach out to folks and spread the network, because it's hard work, but it's, no need to recreate the wheel in a lot of cases with some of the things that are happening across the state. And then I also want to end with some engagement opportunities. So I mentioned Learners to Earners earlier. Would be happy to have you. The registration information is on our website. I also included it in the QR code that was on there earlier in the slides. I think will be sent out later. And then this one here is something that I think will be very exciting for our folks who are working directly with learners. So whether that be our middle school teachers, our high school teachers, our counselors, and then our post-secondary career advisors, we want to provide them with a hands-on experience working directly with industry to understand what those careers and high demand careers look like, require, how they've evolved, what the technology is going to, how's that changed the last several years, what they predict will change in the future. So this influencer program is really a hybrid program that's meant to connect educators with the business community. It's being piloted by our advisory board. So in those locations where our advisory board members are located, we're asking for educators that really, touch students, work with students to get involved. And I've actually put aside some funds to be able to provide $200 Amazon gift cards to the K through 12, kind of 9-month contract people who participate, because I really value that time that's outside of your traditional, contract and things like that. So this is going to take place June 9th through the 12th. And I'm happy to provide more information about this. But I think having folks who have access to the learners engage in this way will only increase the opportunity for work-based learning, increase the opportunity for maybe project-based learning, and hopefully increase sort of the knowledge of the skills needed for these wonderful career opportunities that we have right in our backyard. And lastly, we'll be talking about AI on our upcoming Workforce Wednesday webinar. Time is flying fast. I can't believe it's already March, and this is happening in April, so not too far away from now. We have 3 different speakers lined up for this, but really kind of taking different angles on how AI can be used with students. So I think that's a complimentary webinar, and looking forward to having folks attend. And if you can attend, much like these, if you register, you'll get a recording after. So I encourage you to register, and we'll send you the recording. So, all right. With that, I'm going to leave you with my contact information, and then we can maybe review the chat a little bit. I am happy to, of course, I don't know the formats of these. If there's questions, I'm happy to kind of address some, but there's a chance I might not be able to address them now. One thing I would ask, if you're interested in learning more or even continuing the conversation, this QR code that's on the last slide is a direct link to sign up for our monthly memo. And I do a variety of resource sharing, what are the most advertised jobs every month, and different briefs from the foundation. And also we do a promising practice spotlight. So if you are doing really cool work and want to have that highlighted, I'd be happy to spotlight that for you. You just can send me a couple paragraphs about what you're doing, maybe a link if there's a link to get more information. I'm always looking for that every single month. I would love to highlight what you're doing. So with that, let's see if I can look through the chat real quick, or maybe Iris, I don't know if you have parting words, and we'll kind of leave it at that. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your webinar today.
Oh, we appreciate your insight to what's going on in Florida. We do have a couple of questions. They bounced around. One was to expand on the learners to earners, I believe it was. Yeah, can you expand on the learners to earners program?
Yes. So our Learners to Earners Workforce Summit is a one-day summit. It will be in Tampa at the Grand Hyatt. And actually, let me just hop back to that slide real quick. Here it is. So this event is really showcasing everything from early learning. So we'll talk about positioning early learning as, obviously setting our students up for success to move through the talent pipeline and K-12 and all of that. And there's also the workforce argument about access to childcare. So we'll talk a little bit about that. That's going to kick us off, but really move through, K through 12, post-secondary, and adult and workforce conversations. Probably the question came with the sort of digital data walk, networking, passport kind of add-on. I'm not sure, but we are working to create those digital data posters that basically will be QR codes within what you're going to receive as a gift for coming and attending in person. And that will lead you to the county level data that is basically cradle to career. And then we're going to be arranging the whole event is going to be arranged around the workforce region. So if you would like to sit with folks who are in your region, that will be labeled appropriately, and have those conversations during our networking breaks. And there's dedicated time to really look at that, the data in your that are included in your passport. So we're really excited about it. Some of the feedback, we have great turnout at this event. We do sometimes get feedback of like, oh, we want more opportunities for networking, because we do bring such different groups to this event that have an interest in talent, but largely education partners and some businesses and community-based organizations. So I think this add-on will be fun, especially allowing for folks to meet people who they might not have met before, that are, doing similar work or have similar goals in the region. So
Yeah. It sounds like a great event, and I know that I've got some questions for Drew once we leave, so that we can get into how we can be a part of that. There was
Well,
another
Iris,
question.
Iris,
It was
actually,
last year.
actually last year we were invited and had the
Oh,
opportunity to present to the group on Florida Post-Secondary Comprehensive Transition Program.
great.
And I can share that it is a very well organized, and just like this webinar, it's loads and loads of information about the workforce in Florida.
Great. Great. Okay. So we had another question about, has the research found a link between why there are so many unemployed people with almost the same number of open jobs?
I think I heard you, but if I didn't, it's because there's air blowing in my office.
So this was
Um,
at the beginning, and it was
okay.
you were talking about the ratio or the number of people unemployed,
Uh-huh.
and it was also included the number of people or the number of jobs available in Florida. And the numbers were pretty close to each
Yeah.
other. So they're just wanting to know if there's a link, if the research has shown any links between those two.
So I would say that I would go to our floridascorecard.org. Where is that one? Hold on one second. It was actually after. Here it is. So on the floridascorecard.org, you can actually see by county what these look like. And you can also see sort of a graph. If you click on the actual scorecard tile, it'll show you the graph of the trends and how that number has changed over time. Um, I don't know, specifically. A lot of times, basically, it all relates to like the number of open jobs. So I've seen like the number of open jobs, if it's, over 400,000, then there's probably less people. So there is a relationship there. But I would say all of the data that's on the Florida scorecard, and our economists sort of maintain and update that by the minute, it seems it's in real time, has the source and has sort of a typically like some kind of graph or chart or explains a little bit further about what it actually is. One thing that I think I talked about this, but if I didn't, I meant to. The commuter numbers too play a really big role, because what you notice here is in like Glades County, that looks like a really bad number, but those folks are largely commuting probably to another county. We also have, folks who are driving. Mark talks about this a lot in his presentations I attend with him. It's like we have people driving across Alligator Alley to work in Broward, but it's too expensive to live there. So like those numbers look different because of commuter patterns. So I wouldn't let that be the only part of the story, is these like large numbers, because people move around, a lot, and that is part of the calculation. So
Great. Okay, and there's another question about, will the Florida Industry Immersion for Career Influencers have any other events other than the June event?
So this is a pilot that we're doing this year. And so it was intentional, and I kind of picked the brains of some of the teachers that are still in my network and things, of when this would be when would be a good time. And so, sometimes when you release for the summer, it's really hard to get people back. They kind of, maybe even go out of state or what have you. And then, until right before the teacher prep days and things like that. So we decided to do it just right after the school year ends. And so to keep people one extra week, and those first 3 days are virtual sessions from 8:30 to 10. So really you have the rest of the day anyways to do your thing if you're on a 9-month contract or 10-month contract. But the in-person immersion piece is going to be on the 12th, and that would be like, on site with a company. And so those are sort of the dates, is the 9th to the 12th. I'm hoping that we can get enough interest in this. Even if you maybe aren't sure if you're available, you can still fill out the interest form, because I think that tracking will help us be able to sort of understand what the interest is. And then also, okay, do we want to continue this next year? And it maybe sometimes too, like we're seeing, we don't have businesses in all the parts right now for the pilot, but hey, if there's a lot of folks that are in, a certain county or certain region, then next year we can plan and try to scale it a little bit. I just like to do things for the first time very well. And so I don't want to do something like too big and then, work out the kinks, if that makes sense. So we're starting with our advisory board members as the host for this, because I work with them and trust them that they're going to deliver a good experience for the educators. But obviously there's, a handful of them, and they're in specific locations. For post-secondary folks, I've talked to, different colleges and universities. They're a little bit more flexible, because there's probably budget money anyways to send them, to go to a different city and possibly travel for that sort of half a day. So, it doesn't mean necessarily that you couldn't be placed somewhere that's not right near you, since you are serving students that could end up really anywhere throughout the state. So
Okay, it looks like we're almost out of time. We really do appreciate the valuable insight that you've given us. The link to the evaluation has been added to the chat. We appreciate your feedback on our webinars, and we do use it to schedule additional webinars. This recording will be available on the website next week, and we will be sending it to you along with a reminder to complete the evaluation. Our next webinar will be a technical assistance webinar for our FPCTP teams on April 1st.